Alright guys, welcome to another video from XF Motorsports. For this one, it's time to start work on the C63 again. This is a car that came in about 2 weeks back and the engine wasn't working on it because someone had replaced the head bolts on it, and while putting everything back together, they did not torque the cam adjuster bolts properly, because of which over time they loosened up and they snapped off and the engine went out of timing, and yeah, basically two of the intake valves hit a piston and they bent. So yeah, in this video, let's start off by taking off the intake manifold and a few other things from the top of the engine. Then I'm going to be lifting the car up, removing a few things from underneath, like the exhaust, the alternator, to get to the timing chain tensioner, and yeah, then taking off the head, inspecting, seeing how much damage is inside the engine, and then going from there and fixing it. So yeah, quite a lot of work to do. Let's see how long it takes to actually fix all the damage and get this car running again. So I had to complete this repair in really little time, so I got straight to work by removing the intake manifold. For this one, first the injector rail has to come off, then you see these aluminum bolts, 10 of them, that are holding the intake manifold in place, and once they're removed along with the whole bunch of electrical connectors and stuff, then finally the intake manifold can come off. So after removing the intake manifold on the C63, now is a pretty good time to actually show you guys the intake valves that we're trying to get to. So those are the two intake valves on number 1 that are bent, and you can see that they're both bent, and that's why the well, they're not even closing properly right now, even though if you look at the cam is not even touching the valves right now. So the valves should be fully closed at this point, but they're not fully closed. So yeah, definitely the head will need to come off. I'll need to get both these valves out and then inspect the damage, and hope that there's no damage on the piston or on the valve seat, or not too much damage on the valve seat, so that they can be fixed. But there's still quite a lot of way to go before I get this head off, because next I was getting to the fan shroud, taking this fan shroud out. Not that it has to come off, but just because by taking it off, it frees quite a lot of space in front of the engine, which is going to make it easier for me to take all the serpentine belt and the alternator and everything else off, which I need to take off to get the head off. And while I'm underneath the car, I'm also going to undo the exhaust bolts, because that is also something that I will need to undo later. And yeah, once that's done, then I'm going to get to removing the serpentine belt, alternator, timing chain tensioner, and a few other things to get to getting this head off. So after removing quite a bit of stuff from around the head, now I'm finally at the point where I just need to undo the head bolts and then I will be able to remove the head. So I've taken out the pin that is holding the sprocket in place, so now the sprocket is free. The timing chain guides are free. There's two supports pins that are holding the timing chain guides to the head that go over here. And also, the intake manifold, and also this auxiliary water pump for the heater core that is at the back of the head. This is really difficult to reach and disconnect from the head, but that's done. The dipstick is free, and yeah, basically everything that was linking the engine to the head is now removed. The exhaust manifold is going to stay in place because I've already removed the two bolts that go to the rest of the exhaust over there, so, and one of those bolts actually broke off because it was way too rusty, but yeah, I will get to removing that bolt once the head is out because it's going to be easier then. But yeah, other than that, the whole manifold can come off with the head. I don't think it's going to touch anywhere. So yeah, the next thing is I'm going to start off by removing these 4 bolts on the front of the head. And once these 4 bolts are undone, next I have to untorque the main 10 bolts for the head. And there's also, of course, an untorquing sequence for those. It's the opposite of the torquing sequence. It's outside in. And yeah, once that's done, I'm just going to pull this off and hopefully the whole thing should come off. There is going to be quite a bit of coolant that is going to drip from the head. There's a plug on the block that you can remove and drain the coolant from the block, but I'm too lazy to do that. I'm just going to take off the head and let the coolant spill. I'm just going to put a cardboard underneath. But yeah, other than that, let's start off by removing all the head bolts, taking off the head, and hope that we don't see too much damage underneath. So after taking the head off, here's the first look inside the engine, and you can tell right away that this is where the intake valves hit the piston. They've actually left these pretty big marks on the piston, and you can also tell that it's completely off from where where Mercedes have left the indents on the piston, where the valves are supposed to come really close to the piston. This is something that Tassos actually pointed out. Tassos, if you don't know his channel, he's actually the expert on these engines. He has a YouTube channel where he makes videos on M156s and all different AMG engines. I'll link it in the description below. Definitely go check it out if you haven't seen it. But yeah, basically he pointed out that these marks are completely useless, and I can see his point. The valves did not even touch close to that point. The valves actually hit the piston like right down here. Also, some more information Tassos sent me on these indents recently. So apparently these indents in the piston are only meant for the exhaust valves. They're off for the intake valves. So Tassos actually made this piston where he actually machined the proper indents for the intake valves, and by doing this you can actually run extra intake valve duration without the valves running into the piston. So apparently, yeah, they were just using the same piston on the left bank and the right bank, which is why when one piston gets used from the left bank to the right bank, the exhaust indents become the intake indents on the other side, which is why they both need to be the same. So apparently, yeah, these indents are only good for the exhaust. They're not even meant for the intake valves. So far, it doesn't seem like I can't see any cracking or anything on the piston, and also, well, trying to move the piston around, I don't see that the piston is moving around too much, so that's a really good sign, because usually sometimes what happens is that the top of the piston looks fine, and underneath sometimes the skirt of the piston actually gets cracked, and then the piston starts flopping around from side to side. But I don't think that's the case in this one. But still, either way, I will need to inspect this further, make extra sure that there's no cracks on the piston, because if I put the engine back together with a cracked piston, of course the engine will not last too long like that. Here's a look at the head, and you can tell really obviously where the damage is. It's these two valves, and you can tell that they're not even touching the valve seat. They're like far from it. That's why there was zero compression on this one when I did the compression test. So yeah, basically next what I have to do is I have to take these two valves out. I need to inspect the valve seats really well, make sure that there's no damage on the valve seats. So after removing the intake valves from the head, here is a look at the valves. They are bent completely, but the good news is that they actually bent way underneath the valve guides. So there's no damage at all to the valve guides, and also the valve seats are looking perfectly fine. Not a single scratch on the valve seats. So that's amazing. That means that it's just a matter of cleaning up this head, putting the new valves in, lapping them so they make proper contact with these valve seats, and yeah, then just putting this head back on the engine. Because the other part of the really good news is that this is the condition inside the engine after giving it a cleaning, and this was the piston that got hit by the two valves on cylinder number 1, and not a single scratch on the piston. I was pretty surprised when I saw these results, but just after cleaning it, all those marks that you saw over here, they were gone completely. Underneath the carbon buildup, there's not even a mark on the aluminum. That is amazing. Like, two steel valves hit this piston and bent completely and did not even leave a mark on the piston. Like, how strong does this piston have to be? Same with the condition inside the engine, like the rest of the condition. Like, looking at these walls, like this engine, by the way, has 200,000 kilometers on it, and the cylinder walls do not have a single scratch on them. There is no lip on it. And also, taking measurements of the bore, there is nothing, no measurable difference in the bore. Like, it hasn't gone oval at all after all that mileage. These walls, by the way, they're not alusil walls like other AMG engines. These are TWAS, I don't remember the exact name, but it was something like that. And this was actually the first production engine in the world to come with coating like this. And it was supposed to be, well, the claim was that it was supposed to be like twice as hard as other materials, and it's also a low friction material, so that the pistons, when they're moving up and down, they don't have too much friction and they give you better fuel efficiency. And I can definitely believe their claim because, yeah, considering 200,000 and this is the condition inside the engine, that is amazing. This engine was probably going to be good to go for even another 200,000 kilometers, and it probably wouldn't have any wear inside it at all. So that is amazing to see. Anyone that says AMG engines are not reliable, they need to come and have a look at this engine. Two intake valves got bent completely, hitting that piston, and nothing inside it is broken. Everything is perfectly intact. Amazing. That's pretty good. So next I had to get to lapping the new intake valves. Whenever you're using new valves, or even using a valve from a different location on a different valve seat, you will need to lap them because they will not make proper contact with the valve seat. The purpose of lapping is just so that the valve wears down a little bit and takes the same shape exactly as the valve seat, so it starts making proper contact with the valve seat. Once the new valves were lapped, it was time to put them back in the head, and then it was finally time to just take a few final measurements just to make sure that the head was all leveled and everything, and it didn't need any extra machining or any extra steps. For this I just used a micrometer and the CNC machine and checked the level of the head, and of course this one was extremely flat, only off by 1/1000th of an inch on a few places, which is nothing. For these aluminum heads, even if they're off by a slight bit, you don't really need to machine them to get them back to level, because the torque of the head bolts will take that warp away. After that I did the gasoline test just to make sure that none of the valves were leaking, but this test has failed me once with the Skyline GTR. This test is also not 100%. It's always also better to do a leak down test after putting the head back on the engine. So now that the intake valves are installed and everything is looking proper, it's finally time to put this head back on the engine, and for that I'm going to be using a new head gasket, new head bolts, and a few other bolts that are also one-time use on this engine. And for the engine, I've given everything one final cleaning just to make sure that nothing ends up inside the engine that is not supposed to be in there. And oh well, also having a look at the catalytic converters, that's one thing I was also inspecting. Extremely clean on this car, not a single like anything clogged in there like you usually see on old cars and stuff. So that's amazing. The condition of everything in this engine is extremely new, even after such high mileage. So yeah, now let's get to putting everything back together, and then we'll get to the fun part, actually taking this car out for a test drive and seeing how well everything works after all this. Okay, so now the C63 is almost all back together. I still need to connect a few brackets over here and like the intake air lines and the engine cover and stuff, but I'm going to leave that off for now because right now is the time that I want to try to start this engine and see if it actually starts and if everything actually works. So that is a bit of a nervous moment for me because I've actually never seen this engine running, because ever since this car came here it was broken. It came over here on the tow truck. Well, like most cars that have been coming here these days, but still. Let's get in the car, give it power, and hope that it starts and doesn't give any trouble. That is amazing. First start, and I was thinking it's gonna hesitate to start or something because of all the air in the injector rail and everything, but nothing. It just started up right away. Engine sounds completely normal, idling fine. Everything seems good so far. There's a check engine light. I'm not sure if it's from before or if it's some new codes. I'm gonna have to check it, but right now I didn't want to leave the engine running too long because I want to do an oil change on it right away, because obviously when you take the head off there is going to be coolant that's going to mix with the oil, and all sorts of dirt and stuff gets in the oil too. So tomorrow when I come in I'm going to be putting everything back together, doing a quick oil change on it, and then going through all the codes and taking this car out for a bit of a test drive and everything. But so far, amazing. That's what I love about these Mercedes cars. Like the first time you fix them, everything just works on them. And well, there's a few other cool cars that have come in too in that time since the GTR has left. There's a Porsche Speedster that I'm probably not going to make a video on because there's not something too significant I want to do on it. It has the engine from a VW, and the carburetors needed tuning on it. It came over here on the tow truck. It wasn't running, but apparently this was super easy to get running. All I had to do was tune the carburetors and the ignition, set the ignition timing, and there's a leak underneath that I need to fix, but nothing major on it, so definitely not going to be making a video on it. But the car that I definitely am going to be making a video on, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of this coming soon, is this E55 that has come in all the way from the States. This is the car that is here for the manual swap for the 350Z transmission that I'm going to be installing on this car. So that's something that I can't even wait to get started on. So as soon as the C63 leaves the lift, this car is going to go back, this car is going to go on the lift. I need to take some measurements from it underneath so that I can make sure that everything that I'm designing for it so far is on track. And once I'm good with that, then I will go ahead with making the adapters for the transmission. And once the adapters are milled and everything, then it's going to be time to drop the transmission from this car, put the 350Z transmission in, and then start work on actually making all the electronics and everything else work with the car. Quite a lot of fiberglass or carbon fiber stuff here too. This is for the rear wings that I need to make really soon. There's a few orders that I need to work on, but I'll mention all this. You guys are going to be seeing a lot more content coming on carbon fiber stuff really soon too. There's a whole carbon fiber section that I'm building up there for composites. Let's see how everything goes with this car tomorrow now. So the next day I started off by topping up all the fluids, doing a quick oil change on the car, and just putting the rest of the car back together. Okay, so that was a success. The engine is running fine now. I've filled all the fluids. I'm just going to wait for it to get up to temperature so that the coolant level drops a little, and then I can fill some more. Don't worry about the smoke, by the way. That's normal because of all the oil that spilled on the exhaust while doing this repair. So that should hopefully clear up in a bit, if there's no leaks, of course, on the valve cover gaskets, which I don't think there is because I don't see any oil spilling from there. But also the codes are gone now. Before there was a check engine light, but that was just because of the previous codes that were stored in there from when the cam broke and everything. It was for the cam position sensor and a bunch of other things. So all that is gone now. I'm gonna take the car for a test drive now. Okay, test driving the C63 for the first time after the repair, and so far everything seems pretty normal. I'm gonna give it a few pulls just to make sure that nothing on the cams or anything is out of timing. No check engine lights come up, just to make sure before handing the car back that I am handing it back in like good shape. But so far, yeah, everything seems okay. No leaks I found underneath the car. The exhaust was still smoking a little bit, because there was quite a lot of oil on the exhaust actually, so that might be from that. But after the drive, after getting everything up to temperature, let's hope that everything clears up. Okay, now I'm on some empty roads. Let's push it a little bit and see if everything stays intact. Actually, after the railway lines. These ones are really harsh. Okay. Yeah, everything seems good. Definitely still making its full power, although it's hard to tell with ESP on because oh yeah, definitely pulling strong. Yeah, the car definitely still has all its power, still running okay. Yeah, now I just got to go back to the shop, have a look at everything, make sure that if I have to top up the coolant again, I will top that up, and everything else seems good for the car, making its full power, not leaking anywhere, no surprising noises, no check engine light. So yeah, it's looking pretty good. So this is going to be everything for this video. The C63 has already left the shop because the owner, I guess, was pretty excited to drive it, but it is going to be coming back in tomorrow because he left coilovers that he wants to install on the car next, so it's going to be coming back tomorrow to install these coilovers. But meanwhile, the E63, this is the car that I worked on earlier, this one's back in the shop. Weirdly, also because of cam issues that the C63 was also having, like issues with the cam adjusters. So there's a pin in these cam adjusters that the cam adjusters wear out over time, and then it doesn't lock into the proper groove, and they're really noisy at startup. So this was a bit of an interesting repair on this car today because some bad mechanic had been through it, and one of the bolts on this front cover was ridiculously difficult to take off, and because it was over torqued, then it stripped completely. But luckily the owner of this car is a really good welder himself. He was able to weld the bolt on that bolt which we were able to turn to get that bolt off. And well, even funnier was what we did with the cam adjusters, because 3 of them actually came out fairly okay, but one exhaust one on this side was extremely worn, really bad. There was not a chance of like doing anything with it. So I thought maybe the best way would be to like get a new one, but he had a clever idea. He thought if it's garbage anyways, why not try something on it? So he actually welded and filled the missing metal that was gone from that was worn away from the cam adjuster, and then he told me to mill the same shape that the cam adjuster should be before. So I was not too optimistic about that way, because welding a precision part, like, it would warp and everything. But weirdly, after actually machining it and everything, it actually turned out really close to what a new part would be. So we put it all back together, put it back in the car. We're going to give it a try, not right now, because the other thing that happened during that repair was that these plastic hoses kept breaking off, like this coolant hose that goes from here all the way till here. First it snapped off from here, then it snapped off from here. All this plastic has gotten really brittle on this car, so we're going to be changing this radiator reservoir next, because all of this is getting brittle and cracking off. So until we fix that, we're not going to be able to start the car and find out if the noise is gone or not. But we're going to do that as soon as the parts come in, and I'll let you guys know if this fix works, because if this works, this would be a really cheap alternative to actually replacing the whole cam adjusters, because they're extremely expensive from Mercedes. So yeah, that's going to be everything for now. Thanks for watching. I will see you guys in the next one.